Before we start, just a reminder that I have a Twitch page where I stream 3 days a week. The link is in the description below. Thanks everyone. Before Need for Speed Unbound, before Most Wanted 2012, Hot Pursuit 2010, before they were even purchased by EA in 2004, during development of Burnout 2 Point of Impact, Criterion Games got in contact with EA to make a reboot of Skate or Die since the IP belonged to them, and this was during the height of the popularity of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series. Meanwhile, they also got in contact with EA Canada and pitched Need for Speed Split Second. I wonder what that name turned into. But after Criterion cancelled the skating project due to stress and creative differences with EA, everybody severed ties with the British developer, but mended bridges a few months later, and suggested continuing the Burnout series, and the rest is history. But needless to say, a Criterion-developed Need for Speed game was on the cards for a long time. It was almost inevitable. And after they completed Burnout Paradise and spent a year making bonus content for it, director Alex Ward noticed the trajectory the Need for Speed series was at that point, especially with Undercover. And he called the head of publishing, asking to let Criterion try their hand at a Need for Speed game with the aim of bringing it back to life. EA decided to give Black Box more time to work on a new Need for Speed game known as The Run, with multiple developers including Slightly Mad Studios, Montreal and Quicklime Games making their own. Their first idea was an online-only title similar to the TV show Top Gear, where the story is you won the lottery and you and your friends got access to all the world's best cars and you go off and have some adventures. But they scrapped it and opted to go all the way back to basics, since Alex Ward remembers being a fan of the Need for Speed on the 3DO and Hot Pursuit, the 1998 one. And since this was intended as a reboot to the latter, for this review I'll call it Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. Confirmed on June 2009, and taking what they learned making Burnout Paradise, they incorporated some of those elements, including a giant open world map, technically, taking down opponents, drifting mechanics, so there's a little bit of Burnout in this game. Actually, scratch that, for many, this is Burnout with Need for Speed written in crayon.
Ticket has been issued.
The number of similarities is infinite, even to the tiniest of details, and I could make a separate video with the full list, including an intro narrated by Jules de Jong, leveling system, boosts, achievement, cutscene crashes, and damage, just not this much damage. Alex Ward compared it to the makers of Top Gear producing an episode of Downton Abbey, then that it would still feel like an episode of Top Gear. Okay, there are plenty of elements taken from titles including 3 Hot Pursuit, High Stakes, and Hot Pursuit 2 as well, including the game modes, scenic views, exotic branded hypercars, and police. Imagine a Burnout game with police. It'd actually be a wild ride. There were rumors it was returning to the street racing genre set in San Bay, based off San Francisco. I wonder what that also turned into. But by this point, the Need for Speed franchise was in the middle of an identity crisis, and Hot Pursuit, oh how ironic, felt like a statement, what a 1990s Need for Speed title would look like in the 2010s, like Metallica returning back to its thrash metal roots with Death Magnetic or something.
The SCPD spare no expense to redline it all the way and make you pay. Every day, new drivers still show up and attempt to tame Seacrest County and outrun the law. The pursuit for the ultimate drive starts here. Which side are you on?
Though I'm using the remastered version primarily, I had to play the original one as well to get a good idea of what this would have felt like to play in 2010, because this was a stunning game for its time and still is. Compare it to the last few Need for Speed titles on the same console, it shows how much Criterion wanted this franchise revived. I'll confess, the first time I played this game was in 2019 when I started buying multiple Need for Speed titles once I realized the franchise was popular on this channel. And one of my best friends had it in his collection when it was new and he said it sucked. So I just took his word for it despite the critical acclaim it received in the time, and that's why it's taken so long to give it a chance. And I should not have listened to him because he's wrong. Unfortunately, while not the first Criterion to sacrifice it, let's not forget Black in 2006, it was the first racing game where the Need for Speed is frantic, pun intended, and not run in 60 frames per second even on consoles. Feels very un-Criterion of them to do that. Like at some point during development, they would have worked super hard to try and pull it off. Now, obviously the remaster version corrects that, being 2 generations ahead, and to be fair, this was at a time when 60 FPS wasn't as, let's just say, as highly demanded today, where every single game requires it unless it's the latest Rockstar game. But on the plus side, reducing the frame rate improves the detail of your surroundings. What they really wanted to do was make an interactive version of one of those cool supercar commercials you only really see during an ad break in an F1 Grand Prix. Taking place in Seacrest County, based off the whole west coast of North America, Criterion worked with EA DICE to design the map and its outskirts. Now, they're mostly known for Battlefield, Mirror's Edge, and the Star Wars Battlefront reboots, but it's almost easy to forget they also developed Rally Sport Challenge, V8 Challenge, and Midtown Madness 3, so they have experience in the racing genre too. It's a map where you never think about the transition from one environment to another. It's that seamless. Maybe because while technically being an open world map that you can free roam, you only select what to do next in the event selection, like Burnout 3 Takedown. Again, resembling more closely to the classic Need for Speed titles from the 90s and early 2000s, there's no dedicated city with outskirts. The whole thing is an outskirt with endless variety of terrains, including forests, cliffs, beach sides, and deserts that look, well, stunning. It's when you're on the freeway you get a good sense of that scope and long draw distance that stretches beyond the eye can see. And all the vehicles, the way they're described, they're just so cool to look at. While not as detailed as a showroom in Gran Turismo or Forza Motorsport, but for an arcade racer, they are an exquisite sight to behold. Especially the police cars when the lights are flashing, whether it's in the showroom or driving through a tunnel. It can be a little seizure-inducing, so if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, there's an epilepsy warning for you. But the lighting effects in general are gorgeous. And I also like to say the disc here also looks really nice, the way the red and blue lights blend. I love the different variations of police cars, especially the supercars, something taken from classic Need for Speed or whenever you visit Dubai. Like if you saw a Lamborghini Reventon police car in your rearview mirror, you pull over immediately and give the officer the keys to your house to avoid the question how fast you were going.
Costing $1,350,000 and looking more like a stealth fighter, this is the ultimate weapon in destroying motoring preconceptions.
Unless by some miracle you happen to be driving something even faster. Now Criterion obviously can't do that to these showroom models. But after reviewing Driver San Francisco recently and playing this, I reckon by the time we hit the turn of the decade, the manufacturers became more lenient about their models being damaged. Like you can't say "'tis but a scratch" when you're able to ram them off the cliff like that. That was really satisfying, by the way. Only Criterion know how to make takedowns the perfect stress reliever.
Roger that, 1073 approved. Roadblock units.
Taking down opponents as a crook isn't as easy though, probably because they don't have health bars and there's no road rage based events. Disappointing, but understandable. However, what I don't understand with the takedown mechanics, if opponents hit anything other than you, it doesn't take any damage whatsoever. They can have a full speed head-on collision, and all it means is you have to wait a few seconds for them to catch up again. Like the entire map is made of foam, while only the front of your car is made of diamond.
I got him going in front of you.
I think it's because in this game, unlike Burnout, you're not trying to cause as much damage as possible. It's simply about preventing and committing crimes as the same person. Like the Need for Speed games of old, the career mode consists of races, time trials, and challenges where you're either the cop or crook, taking down speeding drivers Burnout style or preventing them doing the same to you. It's not like Need for Speed in the mid-2000s where you need to escape the heat. There's not even a limit to how many times you crash, but there is a health bar where you can be eliminated from the race, so I don't think you're bulletproof. It's also the first in the series that allows you to take control of a police car since Hot Pursuit 2. You would have thought there'd be a game mode that allowed you to take down street races on the open world maps of Most Wanted or Carbon, but there isn't, which took me by surprise.
Suspect has been given a final warning.
Everything you do earning bounty unlocks cars, and more cars. There's no currency system. Nothing to customize apart from paint color in the remastered version, and the only upgrade from the real deal is nitrous. But then you don't need to add upgrades, body parts, accessories, or 120 different vinyl layers. It's about the cars themselves. Being able to drive as many as you can throughout the career mode. Even from the start, you find yourself driving a different car each event you enter. And you have these preview ones as an excuse to drive some of the fastest in the world, literally minutes into your playthrough. Also, like, you guessed it, Burnout. Imagine the G-force braking at that speed. Even the non-pursuit events never feel like they overstay their welcome, probably because there are no tournaments this time. In fact, all events are point-to-point sprints, and they do their best to stay in theme with police and car chases. Like Time Attack with a cop car, for example, it's structured as get to the destination as a reinforcement to be in position to stop the perp from escaping, and as an officer you get penalized for reckless driving, whereas in a normal car in a Time Attack, you don't. The driving mechanics are weird, in which they feel heavy and light at the same time. There's no input delay when steering, but it feels too heavy when you try to correct a micro mistake and crash in the process. It's why I was hesitant to go through the shortcuts at times, which I also like to quickly point out actually feel like shortcuts that you find in older Need for Speed games, not like Underground or Undercover where they clearly don't serve their purpose. Okay, to be fair, even some of these shortcuts don't serve their purpose either, but it's by design, rewarding you for knowing which shortcuts are the most effective.
Suspect is headed onto the South Base Trail.
Anyway, at least the cars are easy to handle when drifting. They essentially control like the ones in Burnout, but it's 30 frames per second and it's not what I'm used to. Because it's a different story playing the remaster version in 60 frames. It's partly because I've driven in all these events, like I'm playing the game twice so I have a better idea of what to expect, but it's the smooth frame rates and longer draw distance that improve the mechanics. Good or bad though? Definitely good, and again, that sense of speed, it never gets old. Just different when essentially combining two franchises together. It even affects the cars themselves. Other things you unlock in progression are equipment, including spike strips, roadblocks, EMPs, that's a new one, and helicopters. Even as a crook, you can give them a taste of their own medicine and vice versa. There's no storyline explanation as to how and why, but it evens the playing field, allowing the crooks to use the same equipment, and it's a very good way to increase the variety and pressure, particularly as the type of equipment you carry varies, so you're constantly changing strategies. Not as crazy as Burnout, not even as crazy as Hot Pursuit 2 in terms of pressure, where the game completely throws its weight around. Like, go back to these games, holy cow. But as things really start to heat up to the point where it's a challenge just to keep up with the pursuing vehicle, you'll be using everything at your disposal.
I've made contact. He is sustained some damage.
Unfortunately, though it's not as obvious, I still believe AI rubber banding gets in the way. When you reach the final mile, it feels like opponents literally take their foot off the gas or collide with traffic. I'm obviously not going to be passive until I cross the finish line, but there could be one event where you can avoid a crash, still not finish first. Next attempt where you might crash once and go on to win, so it's pretty inconsistent. So was Burnout, but it had the upside of taking down opponents, which you can kinda do here.
Dispatch, I don't think he'll be troubling us again. Look out, spike strip!
Before we conclude, let's quickly look at the Nintendo Wii version, since we have a perfect example of one name, two games here. Developed by Exinit Entertainment, who also made a few Need for Speed DS ports. On first impression, this looks like a follow-up to Nitro, with some of the locations returning from the predecessor, and applies a similar gameplay style instead of a toned-down version of the proper game, which fits better on a less powerful console. It has some of the sound effects, customization features, and game modes, but unfortunately what we got was a toned-down down version of Nitro. No graffiti-based craziness, the camera shakes less during boost, the sense of speed is slower, drifting feels clunkier, trying to resemble closer to what Criterion would do but fell short on that. The physics are bouncy with many unintended bumps causing you to ram straight into barriers constantly, so bad track design on top of that. Opponents haven't got a clue what they're doing, getting tangled amongst themselves nearly every corner. The circuits resemble closer to a Nintendo DS port upscaled to a TV, it looks that bland, and because cars resemble the real life counterparts, not like Hot Wheels in Nitro, they too lack detail by comparison. The whole game feels rushed and broken, and I literally don't have a single positive thing to say about it since Nitro, which I consider okay, does everything else better. Graphics, colors, physics, and if I had to pick a Need for Speed title to not have in my collection, well, it'd still be Undercover since that one is part of the main series, so EA should have known better at the time not to force Black Box to make 3 games in 1 year. Whereas this is essentially Nintendo Wii shovelware, so there was no expectation of this one being as good as this.
All units, local EMPs are now authorized for use. Repeat, EMPs are a go.
Look at the many different versions I have of this game, but that's okay. I love Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. I certainly wasn't expecting another Undercover, especially if Criterion were involved this time. I think what surprised me was how much of a step forward it was in terms of quality. And yes, it's easy to call this an unofficial Burnout follow-up with licensed cars. It was certainly hard to avoid making this review just a compilation of comparisons between Burnout and Need for Speed games because that's how similar they are. But it's mostly the good stuff, and when you combine it with elements from 90s Need for Speed titles including stunning outskirts and police, like come on, that would have been a dream scenario before it was released for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC on November 2010, especially when looking where the franchise was at the time. But would I recommend the remastered version? Only if you don't have a copy of the original and want to experience online multiplayer as well, but given how it looks and plays, this is the best version. They did a solid job remastering it for the current generation. Just avoid the Wii version, of course. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit was a huge success, and Criterion followed it up using another familiar name before the team was cut to 17 employees as a support developer, while the rest became part of the Guildford base of the newly formed Ghost Games in Gothenburg, who became the new main developers of any future Need for Speed games. But after critical reception didn't meet EA's expectations, Criterion returned to the series, merging with the Codemaster subsidiary in Cheshire to make Unbound. What's next? Back to this? I think another Burnout game, thank you very much. Spenny on Crash FM.
Spectre has failed to slow. The target suspect is still on the run.
Suspect has sustained heavy damage. He can't keep going for much longer.
Suspects are now under arrest for initial processing.
Thanks everyone on Patreon, including Anthony Costins, Bibbs, Brittleback, Buster Pixel, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, Emmanuel Figueroa, Eric Barboza, Atmosphere, Indie DM, Night Kid Gaming, Petard GT, Ruben Perkolk, Sam Sneed, Tickford45, Thomas Rosendale, and everyone for watching this review. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, click the notification bell, support on Patreon, join the Discord server, follow on Twitch, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Speak to you guys soon. Spenny out.